In a Thursday night football encounter that will undoubtedly leave Dallas Cowboys fans questioning everything they thought they knew about this team, the Cowboys suffered a humbling 44-30 defeat at the hands of the Detroit Lions, a loss that transcends the final score to highlight a series of structural, tactical, and personnel shortcomings that have been festering beneath the surface for some time and that were mercilessly exposed over the course of a game that oscillated between brief flashes of promise and prolonged episodes of chaos, revealing fundamental flaws in special teams, defense, offensive protection, and coaching decision-making, all of which combined to create a performance that, in many ways, could serve as a turning point, or at the very least a stark warning, for a franchise that has often struggled to reconcile its storied history with the reality of inconsistency in recent seasons. And the implications of this particular matchup are far-reaching, touching on everything from field position strategy to the effectiveness of player development, the accountability of coordinators, and the long-term prospects for Dallas in a season that still holds playoff potential but now carries far more uncertainty than it did entering the week, beginning with the most glaring of the game's failings, the Cowboys' special teams units, which were, by all measures, catastrophic, with kickoff coverage in particular serving as a glaring symbol of a system in disarray, as the Detroit Lions repeatedly exploited lapses in assignment, tackling, and lane discipline to generate returns that not only flipped field position instantly, but also set up drives that required minimal effort to convert into points, highlighted by Tom Kennedy, a relatively unknown name prior to this night, who returned 3 kickoffs for a staggering total of 141 yards, an average exceeding 40 yards per return, not through extraordinary athleticism or individual brilliance in evasion, but rather by running straight upfield virtually unopposed due to a combination of miscommunication, poor alignment, and outright missed tackles on the Cowboys' part, a situation compounded further by Jacob Sailors, who returned 5 kicks for 141 yards, averaging over 28 yards per attempt, statistics that are nearly inconceivable at the NFL level and that speak to an almost systemic ineffectiveness in the coverage units, resulting in the Lions consistently starting possessions in prime scoring territory and converting on drives with alarming efficiency, 8 of which ended in touchdowns on drives that covered no more than 60 yards, a damning testament to how critical field position is in modern football, and how the Cowboys' repeated inability to contest even the initial phase of each drive directly contributed to a scoreboard that by no means reflected only the prowess of the opposing offense, but also the surrender of crucial opportunities by Dallas's own personnel. And this is not an isolated incident within the season or even within the recent tenure of the special teams coordinator, Nick Sorensen, whose units have exhibited vulnerabilities that were visible but never properly addressed. And on this Thursday night, those vulnerabilities became impossible to ignore, as the cumulative effect of repeated breakdowns created not just a competitive disadvantage, but a psychological one as well, allowing Detroit to dictate momentum and forcing the Cowboys into reactive rather than proactive strategies on both offense and defense, with consequences that cascaded throughout the entirety of the game, manifesting in defensive lapses where the front seven struggled to generate consistent pressure on Jared Goff, who, despite facing an ostensibly formidable defensive line, was able to find windows of opportunity repeatedly due to inadequate blitz timing and poor gap discipline, while the secondary, which had been a point of confidence in prior weeks, appeared hesitant and disorganized at key moments, allowing completions on routes that should have been contested and extending drives that, in a more disciplined scenario, would have been cut short, and these defensive shortcomings were compounded by the offensive line's inability to provide Dak Prescott with sufficient protection, leading to hurried throws, missed reads, and opportunities that could have shifted the game in Dallas's favor being squandered, as the offensive line allowed consistent penetration from Detroit's defensive front, forcing Prescott into decision-making under duress, an especially problematic trend when paired with an already compromised field position resulting from special teams failures, creating a perfect storm that left the Cowboys perpetually on the back foot. And while Prescott himself managed to produce over 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. His performance was undeniably mitigated by the surrounding chaos, highlighting a recurring theme for Dallas. Individual talent can shine only to a point, but in the absence of cohesive execution across all 3 phases of the game, brilliance is often rendered insufficient to secure victory, and this interdependence of football's offensive, defensive, and special teams components was starkly on display, offering both fans and analysts a microcosm of the challenges that the Cowboys face in translating potential into consistent results, particularly as coaching decisions came under scrutiny, with head coach Brian Scott's approach criticized as overly conservative in key moments, opting for field goals over high-leverage attempts at touchdowns in situations where momentum and scoring opportunities were on the line, reflecting a pattern of decision-making that prioritizes risk avoidance at the expense of capitalizing on game-changing moments, a philosophy that, when combined with systemic special teams and defensive weaknesses, creates a vulnerability that high-caliber opponents like Detroit can exploit ruthlessly, and the implications of such strategic conservatism extend beyond the immediate game, forcing consideration of long-term consequences for team confidence, player morale, and the public perception of the coaching staff's adaptability and vision, especially in a season where the Cowboys were poised to make a significant statement and reinforce their position as playoff contenders within a highly competitive NFC landscape, with each game now carrying amplified weight in determining playoff eligibility, seeding, and tiebreakers, magnifying the stakes for upcoming divisional matchups against traditional rivals such as the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants, as well as critical encounters with other playoff-caliber teams, where execution in coverage units, pass protection, defensive assignments, and offensive efficiency will be tested repeatedly and with minimal margin for error. And beyond the structural and tactical elements, the psychological ramifications for both players and fans cannot be overstated, as the cumulative effect of repeated failures in key game phases, special teams lapses, defensive inconsistency, offensive pressure breakdowns, creates an environment where confidence is eroded, momentum is difficult to reclaim, and the broader narrative of the season risks being defined not by talent or effort, but by the perception of a team unable to convert potential into consistent execution. And in this light, individual performances take on additional weight, with star players like Micah Parsons and Trevon Diggs facing scrutiny not solely for isolated plays, but for their inability to compensate for systemic breakdowns, while Dak Prescott's high yardage and multiple touchdowns are juxtaposed against the reality that no amount of offensive production could overcome the repeated surrender of field position and defensive lapses, a situation that reinforces the critical interconnectivity of all football components, where the failure of one unit magnifies the burden on others and exposes even the most talented rosters to the risk of defeat. And as fans dissect the performance, social media and sports outlets are rife with frustration and debate, questioning not only coaching decisions, but also roster construction, accountability, and the organization's responsiveness to recurring weaknesses, particularly in special teams, where long-standing concerns have now erupted into a public and undeniable crisis. And the conversation extends to the broader trajectory of the franchise, considering historical patterns of inconsistency, missed opportunities, and a